Well, I want to continue sharing my uh, biography with you, not because I'm famous or will ever become famous, but because um, of seeing and recognizing the hand of God in my life. And this brief life stream is going to begin to address the title Handicap, or was I? Uh, my family background uh, would be classified according to the Psychological Disorders Statistical Manual as dysfunctional, with many subcategories underneath that. Uh, but even though um, my background was less than ideal, an absentee father, a drug addicted mother, uh, God's hand was protecting me, preserving me, and preparing me for what I was yet to do that He would call me to do. Last time I shared with you that about the age of 7 or 8, I prayed to receive Jesus as my Savior, and life became more difficult, and I became more aware of those difficulties. And uh, at my age now, I can look back, and even prior to age 70, I can look back and see many different factors that brought to a culmination and influenced my parents' interactions with each other and then with their children. After my mother's hands were burned and her joy of playing the piano had been taken from her, she never did recover from that. And after I was born, back then, I don't think they knew much about postpartum depression. And I believe after my birth, coupled with the kitchen stove that exploded, a combination of those things began to work itself into her emotions and into her mind, and depression began to set in. As I mentioned earlier, my mother was a Spitfire, about 5'2", 5'3", maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, but she certainly uh, could have had a hurricane named after her. And so, as she struggled with her mental and emotional and physical conditions, let alone her spiritual condition, she found ways to try and compensate for those things. One thing that she did was that she uh, became a spendaholic. She would spend money, and if they were keeping track of the national debt, she would have made a significant contribution to it. My earliest recollection of being with her on one of her spending sprees was getting prepared to go back to school. And so, sometime in the month of August, she bundled me up in the sense of just gathering stuff up. It was August, it was in Chicago, and it was hot and humid. And we went down to do shopping for school clothes. Now, she enjoyed Marshall Fields, which was a very high end store on what they now call the Miracle Mile in downtown Chicago. Marshall Fields would set up a Christmas display. It covered an entire city block with big windows, and each window would have an aspect of the yearly theme that they had decided on, whether it was the Nutcracker or whatever it might be. And it was elaborate, it was magnificent. People would flock down and walk that mile and just be enraptured with what the store had done. Well, mother had expensive taste, first of all, where she shopped at. And then, as I was the baby of the family, I don't know whether she had a compulsion to go ahead and dress me up as a little mannequin. I'm not quite sure, but I can remember being at Marshall Fields in the children's area, and she found some striped shirts that went parallel, not horizontal. And so you look like you were in a prison uniform. And they were not designed to be tucked in, they were squared off on the bottom. And she bought me, a half a dozen of them, all different colors, red and blue and green and black and what have you. And that's what I was to wear to school. It was frankly embarrassing. But during this trip to Marshall Fields, she was unable to get a store clerk to assist her with something. And she became very irate and very angry. And so she grabbed me by the hand and we piled into an elevator, and she was going to go to the top floor and talk to the employment office and register a complaint. Now, it was during the back to school, get your kids clothing, and so the elevators were packed. Back then, ladies wore hats, and hats were held on with these stick pins. And the stick pin could be, maybe that long. And it was up in her hat pin. And so we were at the back of the elevator, and people were not getting out of the way for her to get off on the proper floor. So, being frustrated, she pulled out her hat pin and started jabbing people in their rear ends to make them move. Yes, all 5'2" of her, taking on male humanity in a high-end clothing store. But believe me, she got out with me in tow. And in about a half an hour later, she got that clerk fired because she did not respond as quickly to my mother as my mother thought that she did. This became a habit of her expressing her anger in violent ways. I can remember incidences that would take place a little bit later on that I will share. Was she abusive, physically abusive to my siblings? Yes, I can remember her pinning my brother in the corner, and he was like 6'4", and he had stayed out all night. He was in the Air Force, came back from England. He was on furlough or on leave and had stayed out all night. And mother was irate. And so he came in and she got out her leather belt, her buckled leather belt, a strap that she had, and worked him into the corner of the master bedroom and just started wailing on him, or trying to. And I can remember distinctly it turning into a hoo-ha festival. He just cracked up laughing, that infuriated her even more because he was not responding as she thought that he should. And so Helen, my dear mother, um, had anger issues. And over the next couple of streams, I will share with her, not in a disparaging way, please don't misunderstand, but simply to try to reinforce. I could have looked on my background and said, I'm handicapped. I don't have a chance in this world. I am mentally and emotionally scarred. I need to embrace what psychology says about me. But by God's grace, those thoughts really never took up root in my mind. And it wasn't because I was so smart and brilliant, it was because of God's grace and his hand of mercy in my life. And at strategic times, he brought people into my life to help stabilize me and to help bump me along in the path of following after him. You're not handicapped. You are God's creation. And if you know God through Jesus Christ as your Savior, you are valuable to him, more valuable than the birds of the heaven, more valuable than the lilies of the field. And though you might feel handicapped and your background was not the best and conducive for you, it is a soapbox to build a platform to herald God's grace. Tune in next time as I try to continue to share my life and hopefully some truths that will encourage you.